The world of major global events is often defined by a stark contrast between what is displayed beneath the flashing lights of television cameras and what actually transpires behind closed doors, where the true viability of an enterprise is weighed in ledger books and intense administrative debates. When an initiative begins with a noble purpose and secures the highest level of public goodwill, the assumption is almost always that its future is permanently guaranteed and that the sheer momentum of its virtue will carry it through any storm. However, the modern landscape of large-scale international gatherings is exceptionally unforgiving, and even the most celebrated foundations can find themselves vulnerable to structural shifting that threatens to undermine their very existence. To truly understand how an organization reaches a critical crossroads, one must look past the carefully choreographed press releases and explore the delicate mechanics of funding, institutional backing, and public perception that dictate whether a grand vision can actually be sustained over the long term. This is a reality currently facing a highly visible international initiative which has captured global headlines for years but is now confronting a series of quiet yet profound challenges that are forcing observers to question its long-term survival. As we begin to explore this developing situation, we invite you to stay informed on these shifting global realities by subscribing to our channel so that you never miss our deep dives into the complex forces shaping major contemporary events. Every massive international undertaking relies on a foundational architecture that requires an almost perfect alignment of state funding, corporate sponsorship, grassroots enthusiasm, and reliable administrative leadership to remain operational. When any single one of these pillars begins to experience strain, the entire structure can begin to vibrate with an underlying tension that is difficult to conceal from seasoned industry analysts and investigative journalists who monitor the health of high-profile organizations. For a long time, the public narrative surrounding this specific global endeavor was one of unmitigated triumph and a showcase of how high-level influence could be leveraged to create a powerful platform for inspiration and unity. Yet underneath that polished surface, a different story has been quietly writing itself over the past several seasons, characterized by escalating operational costs, shifting regional support, and an increasingly complex logistical framework that demands an astronomical amount of capital just to stage a single iteration of the event. The transition from a wildly popular and universally praised concept to an enterprise facing serious structural questions does not happen overnight, but rather manifests through a series of subtle indicators that suggest the original formula may no longer be functioning as efficiently as it once did. To fully grasp the gravity of the current situation, it is necessary to look back at how the relationship between international initiatives and their host cities has evolved in an era where local municipalities are increasingly cautious about how public funds are allocated. Staging a massive multi-day event that draws participants and spectators from across the globe requires an immense commitment from local authorities, who must justify the expenditure to their own taxpayers while ensuring that the promised economic and social returns actually materialize. In recent years, several high-profile cities have hosted this major initiative, and while the broadcast coverage always depicted scenes of celebration and triumph, the financial post-mortem reports left behind a much more complicated legacy for local administrators to navigate. This pattern has created a quiet undercurrent of skepticism among potential future hosts, who are forced to look at the staggering millions required to construct venues, coordinate security, and manage logistics, and weigh those figures against the tangible benefits left behind once the crowds disperse and the cameras are packed away. The realization that traditional models of hosting may carry a financial burden that far outweighs the promotional value has sparked a quiet re-evaluation among international stakeholders. signaling that the era of open-ended government funding for such events may be drawing to a close. At the same time, the relationship between this prominent global enterprise and the corporate world has undergone a noticeable transformation, reflecting broader changes in how modern businesses approach large-scale philanthropy and brand partnerships. In the early days of the project, major multinational corporations rushed to align themselves with the cause, providing substantial cash injections and highly visible marketing campaigns that helped establish the event as a premier fixture on the international calendar. Today, however, the nature of corporate involvement has shifted toward a model that emphasizes in-kind services, logistical support, and promotional assistance rather than direct liquid financial contributions that can be used to offset the massive overhead costs of running the organization. While these corporate partnerships remain incredibly valuable on paper, they do not provide the hard capital necessary to pay administrative staff, cover mounting legal fees, or fund the core programs that the initiative was originally designed to champion. This lack of fluid capital has created a profound budgetary squeeze behind the scenes, forcing organizers to navigate an increasingly precarious financial tightrope where the costs of production continue to rise while the actual monetary reserves available to cover them are becoming alarmingly thin. This gathering storm of financial pressure, shifting host dynamics, and evolving corporate strategies has culminated in a situation where the upcoming iterations of the event are being viewed not just as celebrations of human achievement, but as critical tests of institutional survival. The upcoming gathering in a major British city is already generating an immense amount of discussion, not only because of the significant public funds that have been committed to it, but because many insiders view it as the final opportunity to stabilize the organization before structural fatigue becomes impossible to manage. There is a growing sense among close observers that the team on the ground is engaged in an intense effort to simply push through the next milestone, relying on sheer determination and existing commitments to deliver the event while deferring the much larger existential questions about the future until the immediate pressure subsides. What happens after this next major gathering remains a subject of intense speculation, with many wondering whether the initiative can find a way to reinvent its operational model, or if it will ultimately succumb to the heavy weight of its own administrative and logistical complexity. Understanding this unfolding narrative requires a careful look at the intricate balance between individual star power and organizational sustainability, a dynamic that has defined this project from its very inception and continues to shape its public destiny. It raises fundamental questions about whether a global movement can truly outgrow the shadow of its most prominent leaders, or if its fate remains inextricably linked to the personal trajectories, public standings, and choices of those who stand at the center of the frame. As we prepare to delve deeper into the specific financial figures, institutional friction, and personal accounts that are defining this pivotal moment for the organization, the broader picture reminds us that no initiative, regardless of its original intent, is immune to the harsh realities of economic sustainability and structural accountability. The stage is set for a profound transformation, and the decisions made in the coming months will determine whether this celebrated international platform can successfully navigate its current crisis, or if it is moving toward an unavoidable and permanent transition. The operational realities of a major global endeavor often become clear when looking closely at the financial ledgers, where numbers reveal the true health of an organization beyond its public relations campaigns. At the center of the current crisis facing the Invictus Games is a massive £45 million budgetary shortfall that has sent shockwaves through its administrative ranks and raised serious questions about its structural viability. This financial emergency has intensified as the organization prepares for its upcoming iteration in Birmingham, a venture that has already drawn sharp scrutiny due to the immense strain it places on both local and national public funding. The British government and local municipal authorities have stepped forward with a massive commitment of £29 million of taxpayer money to rescue and stage the event, under the explicit understanding that this public investment would be matched or exceeded by private corporate sponsorships and individual donations. However, the reality on the ground has painted a profoundly different and troubling picture, as fundraising efforts have stalled significantly, leaving a massive void that threatens to destabilize the entire framework of the Games. Instead of a robust influx of corporate capital, the organization has managed to secure only a meager £4 million in direct corporate donations, a figure that falls catastrophically short of the targets required to balance the books and ensure a smooth operational rollout. To make matters worse, many of these recorded financial contributions are coming from relatively obscure or unknown corporations, while the primary, high-profile corporate sponsors like Deloitte are structuring their support through in-kind services rather than direct cash infusions. While these in-kind contributions provide vital logistical and technical assistance, they do not provide the liquid capital needed to manage day-to-day administrative overhead, pay escalating legal fees, or cover the massive salaries of top-tier executives. This severe lack of fluid cash has resulted in a quiet but devastating staffing crisis within the Invictus Games Foundation, with experienced personnel reportedly burning out and leaving the organization due to the immense pressure and dwindling resources. Insiders on the ground have described an atmosphere of intense anxiety, noting that the remaining administrative team is essentially trying to white-knuckle their way through the Birmingham event, relying on sheer survival instincts to get through the closing ceremonies. The prevailing sentiment among many close observers and sports industry analysts is that after Birmingham, all bets are completely off, and there is a very real possibility that the international franchise may not survive in its current form. This looming existential threat is compounded by a growing awareness that the financial model of the Invictus Games has become dangerously top-heavy, with an incredibly small fraction of the multi-million-pound budget actually trickling down to benefit the wounded warriors themselves. A closer analysis of the organization's public financial disclosures reveals a highly controversial distribution of wealth, where an overwhelming majority of the incoming funds are consumed by bloated administrative salaries, substantial legal costs, and the staggering production expenses of star-studded opening concerts and promotional ceremonies. According to data scrutinized by critics and investigative journalists, only about £200,000 out of the massive multi-million-pound operational budget actually goes directly towards supporting the participating veterans and their immediate recovery programs, while everything else is absorbed by the grand apparatus of the event production itself. This stark disparity has triggered an undercurrent of public outcry and deep frustration, particularly because the official Invictus Games policies state that the foundation does not actually cover the travel, accommodation, or participation expenses of the competitors unless they happen to be in active military service. For the vast majority of wounded warriors who have transitioned out of the military due to severe injuries, like the loss of limbs, this policy imposes a heavy financial burden, forcing them or their families to find independent ways to fund their journey to the Games. This practice stands in sharp contrast to established domestic programs such as the United States Department of Defense Warrior Games, which operate with a fraction of the budget while completely covering the expenses of every single participating veteran. The realization that alternative domestic programs offer comprehensive support for pennies on the dollar has caused a major shift in how international governments view the necessity of the Invictus Games franchise. Countries like Australia and the United States have long possessed their own highly efficient internal programs designed to provide wounded service members with competitive athletic opportunities, rehabilitation incentives, and long-term community support without the need for an expensive international circus. This dynamic became particularly tense following a highly publicized tour of Australia by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, which many local critics and officials later retroactively characterized as a quasi-royal tour mixed with self-promotional marketing. In the aftermath of that high-stakes visit, Australian authorities quietly signaled a desire to distance themselves from the heavy financial obligations of the Invictus franchise, choosing instead to reinvest public resources directly into their own pre-existing domestic veteran programs. This pattern of regional withdrawal has left the Invictus Games increasingly reliant on a diminishing pool of host nations willing to shoulder the astronomical costs and complex logistics associated with staging the event. The financial strain became blindingly obvious during the iteration in Vancouver, which accumulated a staggering cost of over 60 million Canadian dollars, while catering to a relatively small group of only about 540 competitors. This extraordinary expenditure per athlete has fueled intense debates regarding the true purpose of the Games, with critics like investigative author Tom Bauer reporting that a growing number of veterans are becoming deeply disillusioned with the event's modern trajectory. There is an increasing sense of frustration among some participants who feel that the Games have gradually transformed from a pure athletic competition honoring wounded service members into a heavily managed promotional vehicle centered around the personal brand and public standing of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. This sentiment is reinforced by reports of empty stadiums and low public attendance during the actual sporting events, a reality that stands in sharp contrast to the carefully curated media images presented to the global public. Behind the scenes, observers have noted that television audiences and live crowds are often artificially managed, with production crews arranging specific groups of people to crowd around the Duke and Duchess for high-energy photographs and film clips. Once the necessary promotional footage and professional photographs are secured, the royal couple frequently departs the venue early, and the gathered crowds are allowed to disperse, leaving behind largely vacant stands for the remainder of the athletic competitions. This reliance on traditional media tricks and carefully managed imagery has grown increasingly difficult to maintain in an era dominated by the internet, smartphone cameras, and independent social media reporting, where everyday spectators can easily broadcast the reality of empty venues and logistical friction to a global audience. The growing transparency provided by modern digital platforms has chipped away at the polished reputation the organization enjoyed during its early years, exposing the deep structural cracks that threaten its future. As public awareness grows regarding the high administrative costs and the minimal direct financial benefit reaching the actual wounded warriors, the foundational goodwill that once shielded the Invictus Games from criticism has begun to erode. The impending event in Birmingham is shaping up to be an incredibly tense turning point, not only because of the immense financial deficit hanging over the organizers, but because the local and national taxpayers are beginning to demand greater accountability for where their hard-earned money is going. With corporate cash drying up, internal staff fleeing the organization, and veteran communities expressing growing skepticism about the true motivations behind the leadership, the pressure on the upcoming games has reached an unprecedented level. The narrative has shifted from one of unmitigated inspiration to a complex story of survival, where the grand vision of an international platform must now answer to the harsh realities of financial insolvency and public doubt, leaving the future of the entire enterprise hanging in a precarious balance. To understand how the Invictus Games arrived at this critical juncture, it is essential to examine the core of its creation and the fundamental misconceptions surrounding its origins. The global public has largely been led to believe that the concept was a completely original, groundbreaking brainchild of Prince Harry, a narrative that has been polished and repeated by media outlets for over a decade. In reality, the concept was directly inspired by the United States Department of Defense Warrior Games, an existing and highly efficient program that Prince Harry witnessed firsthand during a visit to San Diego. The British Royal Palace machinery at the time, recognizing a golden opportunity to rehabilitate the young prince's wild public image and channel his military background into a structured, dignified role, expertly took that pre-existing American template and copied it on an international scale. This clever administrative branding exercise successfully turned an unoriginal idea into a global phenomenon, establishing a powerful platform that relied heavily on the institutional power of the British monarchy to secure its initial success. However, now that the organization operates independently from the protective umbrella of the palace infrastructure, the structural flaws of trying to run a massive, top-heavy international franchise without a solid financial foundation have been laid completely bare. This brings the narrative directly to the impending crisis in Birmingham, where the intersection of skyrocketing security costs and public resentment threatens to overshadow the athletic events entirely. Staging an event of this magnitude in Birmingham presents a unique and incredibly volatile set of challenges for local authorities, who are already grappling with severe municipal budget constraints. The situation is further complicated by the massive public controversy surrounding Prince Harry's personal memoirs, specifically his highly publicized and widely criticized descriptions of his military service in Afghanistan. These public admissions have significantly elevated the personal security threat level surrounding the Duke of Sussex, requiring an unprecedented and exceptionally expensive counter-terrorism and protective apparatus whenever he visits the United Kingdom. Because the Invictus Games Foundation cannot independently afford this multi-million-pound security bill, the financial burden is legally forced onto the British taxpayers under strict state protection protocols, provided they receive the required 29 days of notice before his arrival. This dynamic has sparked intense outrage among local residents, who are left wondering why their public funds are being diverted to provide high-level security for an individual's private initiative, while local public services face severe cutbacks. The frustration among the public is mirrored by a deepening rift within the global veteran community itself, as more wounded warriors begin to question whether their sacrifices are being used to burnish a corporate brand rather than honor their rehabilitation. For many injured service members, the realization that the event has become inextricably bound to the commercial and media ambitions of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has caused them to seek alternative, less commercialized avenues for athletic competition. This growing sense of alienation is fueled by the stark contrast between the massive multi-million-pound production values of the opening and closing ceremonies and the minimal direct financial assistance provided to the athletes who actually make the games possible. When a high-profile international event begins to prioritize the red carpet arrivals, professional photography teams, and personal promotional opportunities of its founders over the tangible needs of its participants, the foundational integrity of the entire movement begins to collapse. The upcoming gathering in Birmingham is increasingly seen as the ultimate testing ground for whether the Invictus Games can decouple itself from this whirlwind of personal controversy and refocus on its original mission, or if it will permanently alienate the very people it was created to serve. Looking at the broader biography of Prince Harry, his military career was once the most stable and universally respected chapter of his public life, providing him with a genuine connection to the armed forces and a profound understanding of the challenges faced by wounded personnel. His 10 years of service in the British Army, including 2 operational tours in Afghanistan, earned him the respect of both the public and his fellow soldiers, making him an authentic and powerful advocate for veterans' causes upon his return to civilian life. It was this deep-seated respect that allowed the Invictus Games to launch with such overwhelming global enthusiasm in London back in 2014, drawing immense support from the royal family, the government, and international allies. However, his subsequent departure from active royal duties, his relocation to the United States, and his involvement in a series of highly public commercial media ventures have fundamentally altered how his philanthropic efforts are perceived on the global stage. The transition from a dedicated royal patron backed by the state to an independent media figure navigating the commercial market has created a profound structural instability within his charitable foundations, forcing them to compete for corporate dollars in an increasingly skeptical and cautious market. As we look toward the future of the international veteran support movement, it is clear that the landscape is undergoing a permanent and necessary transformation toward localized, sustainable, and less commercialized models of care. The survival of platforms like the Warrior Games in the United States and similar domestic initiatives in Australia demonstrates that the true work of veteran rehabilitation does not require an astronomical international budget, bloated administrative hierarchies, or red carpet media spectacles to be incredibly effective. These domestic programs quietly achieve remarkable success for pennies on the dollar, ensuring that every single cent of public and private funding goes directly toward the medical care, travel expenses, and long-term athletic training of the service members themselves. The ongoing crisis surrounding the Invictus Games serves as a powerful cautionary tale for the international philanthropic community, illustrating that even the most noble and well-intentioned causes can become unsustainable when they are allowed to turn into top-heavy marketing vehicles driven by individual celebrity culture rather than structural accountability. Whether the organization can successfully white-knuckle its way through the impending storm in Birmingham and reinvent its entire financial strategy remains to be seen. But the era of open-ended taxpayer funding and uncritical public adulation has officially come to an end. The true legacy of any international movement is measured not by the height of its media profile or the glamour of its opening ceremonies, but by the lasting positive impact it leaves behind in the lives of the ordinary individuals who participated in it. For the hundreds of wounded warriors who have found hope, community, and physical renewal through competitive sports, the spirit of camaraderie remains entirely real and deeply worthy of protection, regardless of the financial chaos happening at the executive level. The tragedy of the current situation lies in the fact that the incredible achievements of these resilient athletes are being overshadowed by a £45 million budget deficit, intense staffing shortages, and public debates over security costs and personal branding. As the international community watches the countdown to the next Games, the ultimate question is whether the foundation can return to its roots and place the focus squarely back on the veterans, or if the heavy weight of administrative mismanagement and personal controversy will cause this once great institution to permanently fade away into history.